So that's where my sort of gender equality side came in and said, look, there are so many people from the male side who, one, being really disempowered. It's the same sort of thing we see all the time in women's health, is this classic case of like this aspect of health not being taken seriously and not being treated as a real health issue, and vice versa, putting all of the burden of fertility on women, and just realizing how unjust that is and how it's really shocking. It's one of the only times men aren't even addressed on many
Mhm.
fertility clinic websites. And so, as you can tell, I'm really passionate about this. And similarly, especially for where I am in my life, I'd like to have children in the next couple of years. And I thought to
Mhm.
myself, of course, like I would get my partner tested, and even the language I use there, right? I would get my partner tested. It wouldn't be, oh, because of course, I've had my fertility tested before, and it was a horrific
Mhm.
experience, incredibly invasive.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, I hate to say it, but men have it a lot easier for that initial investigation.
Mhm.
And so that's really where we not only saw this massive societal potential, and as you mentioned, mission driven, we thought we'd love to see this change in the world, take the burden off of women, really empower men to have control over their fertility and their reproductive health care. As well as just in the very big picture, it's a massive opportunity in terms of building a business and how
Mhm.
much we could actually impact and help, and all the different types of interventions we could have. So,
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Features with Hello Advisor. This is a special content series where we're inviting founders and individuals to share their stories and experiences. Today, we are joined by Lily Elsner from Jack Fertility. Hi, Lily. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. How are
Of
you?
course. I'm good. I'm good. I'm really excited for today's conversation, especially to hear from you, your experience as a founder, and of course, more about Jack Fertility, which is a pretty unique startup in terms of, what you guys are trying to accomplish in the space that you guys are working in. So, Lily, if you could fill us in for those who are unfamiliar, what exactly Jack Fertility is and what you guys are trying to do.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Alexis. Because yeah, the hint is in the name. But we are actually on a mission to make sperm testing as easy as possible. So we've developed the world's first entirely postal sperm kit that offers a full semen analysis as if you'd gone to a fertility clinic. The kit arrives directly to the customer's door, and they send it back to our lab here in Oxford. We analyze the sample and then give not only the results, but also next steps recommendations based on the fertility goals of the individual, to really try and prevent male infertility before it starts.
Gotcha. That's awesome. And so I know your co-founder, Nick, he has personal experience that sort of formed a part of the driving reason for founding Jack Fertility. But I would love to hear, what your personal connection is, to the company and to the mission.
Yes, absolutely. My pleasure. Because yeah, you have to have that connection to
Hmm.
get through the startup journey, as I imagine everyone listening to this would attest to.
Hmm.
So my personal experience with this was really around when Nick shared that he was trying to get tested during lockdown. He shared that it was really difficult to get an appointment in person because you had to go in person to give the serum sample because it dies within an hour.
Hmm.
And actually, growing up rurally in the US, I knew a lot of livestock farmers and knew that artificial insemination, often through the post, is the most common way for animals to be born. And I was just so shocked, normally being on the femtech side of things, advocating for women's health, that male fertility and male reproductive health wasn't sort of at the normal standard of saying, oh, this is the way things are done. And so for Nick, I thought surely there's a postal test or there's something you can do remotely. And as we started looking at the options that were available, we discovered that they were all really focused solely on the technology and about the sort of sperm cell, and really forgetting about the human experience whatsoever. And frankly, that Nick was really rare in being a man who even knew that his fertility could change, that his sperm quality could be improved, and how important it is for the male factor to be as healthy as possible when one is trying to conceive. So, for example, like most people don't know that sperm regenerates every about 74 days. So, if you get tested quarterly, you can see this massive variation in sperm health based on the health of the overall person. And as we looked into it further, I started realizing that, I mean, the number one reason for IVF in the UK is actually male factor infertility. So, that's where the male has really poor sperm quality, and the female parent is usually almost completely fine in those cases. And so there are a lot of women who are having to go through IVF solely because their partner has poor sperm quality. And a lot of those cases, almost some estimates are over 90% of those cases are completely treatable if you find out about them early and if you
Mm.
intervene. Because
Mm-hmm.
almost all of these issues are reversible, or even if there are, say, genetic issues, physiological issues, those can be treated or mitigated.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where my sort of gender equality side came in and said, look, there are so many people from the male side who, one, being really disempowered. It's the same sort of thing we see all the time in women's health, is this classic case of like this aspect of health not being taken seriously and not being treated as a real health issue, and vice versa, putting all of the burden of fertility on women, and just realizing how unjust that is and how it's really shocking. It's one of the only times, men aren't even addressed on many
Mm-hmm.
fertility clinic websites. And so, as you can tell, I'm really passionate about this. And similarly, especially for where I am in my life, I'd like to have children in the next couple of years. And I thought to
Mm-hmm.
myself, of course, like I would get my partner get, and even the language I use there, right? I would get my partner tested. It wouldn't be, oh, because of course, I've had my fertility tested before, and it was a horrific
Mm-hmm.
experience, incredibly invasive.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, I hate to say it, but men have it a lot easier for that initial investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really where we not only saw this massive societal potential, and as you mentioned, mission driven, we thought we'd love to see this change in the world, take the burden off of women, really empower men to have control over their fertility and their reproductive health care. As well as just in the very big picture, it's a massive opportunity in terms of building a business and how
Mm-hmm.
much we could actually impact and help, and all the different types of interventions we could have. So that's sort of in our MBA mindsets. And Nick and I met on the Oxford MBA.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of thought, tick tick, like these are two massive revenue opportunity, massive societal impact. It only made sense. And actually, my background before was in consumer banking, and so I was like,
Oh, wow.
thinking will always be there, but we'll definitely need to do it now to get in front of the male fertility crisis.
Yeah. Wow. I really love that. How much like empathy goes into your guys' sort of first connection and that building that conversation and uh I guess vulnerability around this whole topic. I also something I also appreciated was that you sort of opened it up, this conversation about fertility is not a one-way street. It kind of involves, both sexes to sort of be on board and be on the same page about fertility. So yeah, I really love that. And and I want to take some more time to talk about the mission because that you guys are making an impact on the personal level, of course, between families and couples, but of course, also a bigger impact on the discussion around fertility. So since Jack Fertility has been founded, and your journey since that point, how would you say the company and its product has brought more awareness to the discussion surrounding men's fertility? Maybe a good place to start is talking a little bit more about the product and how it works.
Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
So the way that it works is really, I hate to say it, but it's just a cup in a box.
I mean,
But
simplicity works.
precisely, it does, and that's actually what we found. And so, to your great question about the product and how it works, is that basically we knew that what was the real goal is that, one, we wanted to make sure that we could give the right results to the right person, and make sure that they got the accurate, holistic results that they would need to begin any sort of investigation, whether it was to say they're fine, whether they need to immediately get to a clinic, and anywhere in between, because that was really what people were worried about. And so Nick's background is in fast-moving consumer goods marketing and had spent his whole career in consumer insights at Nestle, Kraft Heinz, Imperial, and had a lot of experience with looking at sort of consumer-driven products, as well as sort of how to price those and all of those different pieces.
Hmm.
Versus for me, I had been at Capital One Bank and also been focused on consumer centricity in banking services. And so for us, we kept realizing through our professional careers and, of course, in the MBA, how often that's forgotten in the development process and when developing businesses. So we just said, let's not worry about the tech. Let's figure out like what are people what is the real thing that they need? And what they needed was to not be tested in person, because it was so inconvenient, horrible, embarrassing, emasculating.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, being in the UK during the pandemic, I mean, we're popping PCR tests through the post box. We're sending all sorts of samples, any fluid you can imagine, except for sperm. And so for us, we were like, why is that the case? And part of it was around the sort of incumbent nature of the fertility market. That was really around thinking about how people even found out that they needed to go. And so for us, a lot of it was around fear and about feeling, again, emasculated or not wanting to contend with the idea that something was wrong. And so what we
Mm-hmm.
tried to do with that is literally create a little black box, very subtle. No one needs to know what it is. You don't need to speak to a person to order one, discreetly delivered to the door, and then very simple. And quite funnily, while doing, we've done hundreds of different samples dropped off to our lab to develop an aging algorithm that allows us to have delayed results. So
Mm-hmm.
the individual, all they need to do is create a sample into a small cup. We add a preservation fluid, and then through a QR code, they tell us a bit about their lifestyle, about their medical history, and then tell us when they took the sample. Then they
Mm-hmm.
box it up, pop it in a post box. We receive it in our lab and just know exactly how many hours it's been since they created the sample. And then we've developed aging algorithms that adjust for the degradation in the sample since the time they created it. And this
Mm-hmm.
is accurate as a clinic. And so we're able to keep that alive for about 5 days consistently.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's, you don't have to run to an appointment, you don't have to run to the post box. It's very
Mm-hmm.
flexible. um, but really, that was so important from the countless interviews we did with fertility physicians, with the GPs and the NHS, with patients themselves who have been through infertility treatment, as well as people who've never even considered and frankly don't know anything about their sperm.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone consistently said, I want to know whether I'm okay. I want to know what my results mean. And then, really importantly, if they were okay, they really wanted to know how they compare to other men.
Oh, really?
That was a really interesting consumer insight that I thought, again, it was really important to have that consumer feedback. And also, again,
Oh,
especially as a woman, I didn't realize how many of our assumptions are quite gendered. And so
yeah.
it's been a really fascinating way to learn how to trust the data. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and to really sort of follow what your consumers tell you, because a lot of assumptions I would make are not what we got in the feedback. And so I think that's another, like to your point earlier, we try to be really vulnerable in a lot of what we do because we see that that's a lot of the issue in this industry is that people
Mm-hmm.
get really worried about how they're perceived. Or for example, especially anytime in health tech, I saw this prior to building Jack. I was head of strategy for an AI drug discovery company. And in
Mm-hmm.
biotech, it's so often that people are trying to almost force science and tech into a consumer use case
Mm-hmm.
rather than, we just had the mindset at the time, it was 2022, 2023, and we said, it is those years. Like, we can make anything. Gen AI is happening. Like, surely we can come up with the science to do this.
Right,
I think
right.
that was really freeing, is to figure out, and that's also to your question before of like motivation and being driven by the mission, is
Mm-hmm.
able to say, have that abundance mentality of saying we can do this, we will
Mm-hmm.
happen, but we need to make sure that we're solving that. Almost, again, it's classic product market fit, but saying
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're going to build rather than trying to iterate to that point, from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
Does that
Yeah.
answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And it actually created a couple more in my head, really.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's so interesting that you're kind of learning more about, your consumers as you build this product. And of course, like expanding your knowledge and like your perception and biases as well, which is really, really fascinating. And so kind of leading into my next question, I'm curious, like how much, if any, resistance you guys have experienced sort of bringing or like building this company and sort of working to change a discussion around this topic. Because it's not easy to change people's minds, especially when a topic like men's fertility is so already has perceptions deeply embedded in like social and cultural contexts. And I'm sure like, the journey to changing those perceptions has not been easy. So I kind of wanted to hear like what sort of challenges you face along the way, and how you guys are continuing to pursue the mission.
Definitely. Well, thank you,
Mm.
because you are correct. They're very, very challenging in some ways. However, I think and hopefully again for everyone's sort of uh, it's been really fascinating building this for consumers while also contending with the elephant in the room, which is investment and funding.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been really struck by the narrative from the consumers where it is, I mean, even in our name, right? The number one answer to your question, how do we do this, is with humor. It's so awkward, it's so silly, but I mean, it's in the name, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
Jack Fertility is in fact a pun. People often ask Nick if he named it after himself, and he did not. But we wanted Jack Fertility to be Jack because it is really approachable. And every time we talk about this, we always give everyone a pass of at least one joke. Everyone has to make it a little bit funny because it breaks the ice. And then
Mm-hmm.
we can also sort of meet people. We can also quickly assess where they are in their level of comfort when we're talking about Jack. So if someone can barely even say anything to do with male fertility, then we sort of know who we're dealing with versus someone says, the best sperm pun you've ever heard in your life. You're like, okay, I can sort of tailor my message to those folks. And I think a mix of that also is there's just so much like it's the tip of the iceberg in terms of
Mm-hmm.
people, and especially this day and age thinking about gender. uh,
Mm-hmm.
I've had a number of conversations with especially like older men who I think there are two important things to point out. There's sort of a societal like lack of language around gender that people just sort of never had an opportunity to talk or did never really learn the language around gender.
Mm-hmm.
But very importantly, I mean, the spermageddon, the decline in sperm quality
Mm-hmm.
has really only been happening since the 70s, but it's a relatively modern phenomenon that there's such a high rate of infertility, and
Mm-hmm.
that's only been increasing. And so I think really since 2000, you started, I mean, this has been shown since the 1970s, globally, sperm count is down about
Mm-hmm.
60%. But it was such a taboo issue, and it was very, very stigmatized, but it also wasn't quite as common as it is today. And so there are these number of different factors where you, again, are trying to really relate to folks, have those discussions. But I do think the mix of humor, the reliance and the amazing statistics that are available, and then also the delivering that message with a tinge of hope, because I think that's the other thing is people are so afraid of being diagnosed as infertile, and they know how awful and difficult and sort of struggle filled that process is. But it's really tough on the female side to treat infertility. However, on the male
Mm-hmm.
side, there's so many things you can do. And so I think that's the other major part that we try and focus on is how treatable this is. And by getting tested quarterly, which is not only great recurring revenue for us, but it
Mm-hmm.
is a way to benchmark for a person rather than saying, oh, this is going to be this massive process that you even have to have ancillary industries that support. So that you're thinking of, for example, going through cancer treatment and not only having
Mm-hmm.
to go through, say, chemo, but also all of the support services around that. I mean, for us, it's this incredible thing where as you have those support, you can figure out ways to actually get the treatment or make other decisions on how to build a family. And that's really what sustains those people when they're going through the process. Patients who are experiencing infertility have to have that hope. And that's something we take a lot of courage from as we go through the startup journey as well. But funders are a whole different story because it just depends on whether they understand or believe the data. And the urgency of the matter. And I think that's been really interesting. I got some feedback from a very sort of later stage investor who told me as we were struggling to raise initial funding because we're
Mm-hmm.
doing hardware, we're doing consumer in the post 2021 sort of bubble burst in terms of investing.
Yeah.
And they sort of said to us, look, you need to read the signals from the market. And I was like, well, actually, we've been doing a huge amount of market analysis. We've talked to hundreds and thousands of people. We're getting all the traction signals there. It's really not, that's not the market I care about, frankly, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
of course, I want to be funded, but more importantly, I want to create a high revenue generation product that makes massive impact. So it's been really interesting to sort of experience that in the world of investing and sort of understanding the mindset of especially a venture investor who's trying to read the signals of markets, but also in that investing trend rather than focusing on where the revenue is going from that sort of business to business angle.
Gotcha. Yeah. So would you say that, like, well, I guess, trying to appeal to investors as well as a whole nother aspect of the business that you guys are trying to navigate. And I guess I'm sure
Yes.
it's not easy or, comfortable maybe at first to sort of start up that conversation. But I guess this sort of relates to my next question is that, um, taking into mind the fact that you guys want to make impact, but, also stay profitable and be able to run the business, you have two responsibilities as a founder. Um, One is leading social change, and the other is, making sure your business is sustainable. So how do you sort of relate these responsibilities? Do they overlap? Do they not overlap? And when it comes down to it, how do you make your decisions based on what's most important to you as a founder?
Definitely. I mean, we're lucky in this sense, in that the Venn diagram is basically a circle,
Mm,
because we have this sort of extraordinary combination of we have very few competitors. Our biggest competitor is the legacy infrastructure, and that's not serving people. It's not serving
mhm,
where people need to go. It's extremely difficult to get an appointment on the NHS, for example. And even then, customers are not getting customers patients, however we want to define them, they're not getting the information that they need. And mostly that's because you have to actively try and conceive in a heterosexual relationship for 12 months to even get on a waiting list that usually extends for 3 to 4 months to be able to actually get a semen analysis. So what you're not paying in money, you're paying in time if you're on the
mm,
NHS route versus you're having to pay a huge amount of money initially at fertility clinics in a lot of cases if you can even be acknowledged as a patient and not have to go in with your partner for an initial analysis. And then there are a number of at-home tests that give you a little bit of information, but really not. If there's an issue with that information you get from an at-home test, you then have to go in person. And
mhm,
for us, I mean, the amazing thing about our business model is that we have incredible margins. We're entirely vertically integrated in terms of but we lease our own lab. We do all of our science ourselves, and have full control over our supply chain. And so our we would only need very few customers to be
mhm,
profitable. And so even in the case, I mean, the extraordinary thing of building this, especially with the research study and trying to spread the word of what we're doing, there is a sort of like there is only net positive of even if someone hears about Jack and they don't test with us, like that's an extraordinary way. And I
mhm,
have some amazing things I've been able to sort of see through friends getting tested, even just knowing about Jack and being able to mitigate a lot of issues that would have been major down the line. So, for example, a friend of mine, I told him all about what I was building about Jack, and he said, "Oh, actually, we wanna start trying, so I'm gonna go get tested." He got tested, in our research study and found out that he had an issue and got it
mhm.
sorted out, and now they fell pregnant completely naturally. The
Wow.
baby's gonna be born soon, and it just really brought it home of saying,
Mhm,
whether they test with us, whether they test with someone else, like, that societal impact is massive. However, again, because there are so few competitors, we see ourselves as being able to really capture that. And I think it's harder for a lot of founders who are in either really competitive industries or in sort of areas that aren't. It's really difficult to evaluate their impact, whether it's through their revenue or through, again, the sort of whatever the metrics are they're trying to achieve. Whereas
mhm,
again, especially Nick and I are both so corporate, we come from backgrounds where, I mean, my entire job for most of my career has been implementing objective and key result structures and various forms of product management and analysis, business analysis. So we're
mhm,
all we do is think about metrics. But luckily for us, it doesn't necessarily have to be babies born or semen samples improved, but it sort of all coalesces into one really positive, like both sort of purpose and profit go hand in hand in our case.
That's awesome. And I bet that makes running the business a lot easier for you guys, since those two goals are very aligned moving forward. Um, But yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing more about Jack Fertility. Just the amount of intention that you guys have put behind, every aspect of the business as well. I think that's very meaningful and has made a lot of like impact and value for those that, like you said, like have even heard of you guys and maybe not have even used your product yet. But yeah, so you did mention one small story of your friend who got tested and was able to find out those issues earlier, and then ultimately, um, uh, be able to conceive a child with his partner. That's very heartwarming and brought a smile to my face. Um, so, uh, are there any other milestones that you guys would like to share? Any celebrations since you guys have been founded that has sort of kept you going along this path?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. Well, we have been lucky enough to have two other people who participated in our research study also be
Hmm.
able to overcome recurring miscarriages, which was really special. And I think just even digging a little bit deeper into that, oftentimes when people have these investigations, it really depends on the clinic or the practitioner who evaluates them, whether there's sort of advice or treatment given, because often it is just small lifestyle changes that are needed. But in one of the cases, there was an infection. So oftentimes people don't get the white blood cell count when they get an analysis done because usually it's just looking at the sperm cells themselves.
Hmm.
And what we were able to pick up in our test is that we noticed that there was a really big immune response happening, and ended up being an asymptomatic infection that simply took one course of antibiotics to resolve. And after two miscarriages, they've now been able to carry their baby to term, which is just like I get
Wow.
chills just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Especially again, we were able to start introducing that into our results because one of our scientists who worked with us had said, from her experience in clinics, often that was the case, but it only got sort of picked up after many different analyses, many different urologists looking at all of these things, and us learning a lot from sort of the industry conferences and understanding sort of what the existing issues are just for people within the larger field of andrology. And so I think that's another case where, as much as we're trying to listen to consumers, we're also really trying to learn from the experience of people in the field, whether it be OBGYNs, whether it be
Hmm.
from, people who work in pathology, like all these different areas really can inform, and we have a lot of agility in. So that was one massive celebration for sure. But even we've been trying to really do that, especially in such a trying time for building a startup and the sort of lack of capital. Like we've had some pretty wild times
Hmm.
as we build it. So, for example, when we started Jack, we were lucky enough to win an Innovate UK award, and
Hmm.
so I had a really shocking and incredible moment where at the time, Rishi Sunak was the prime minister, and
Hmm.
they had said, "Oh, there's going to be some press around the awards." But all of a sudden, one Wednesday morning, I get this LinkedIn notification on my phone as I was waking up, and
Hmm.
it said, "Rishi Sunak has tagged you in a post," and I was like,
Wow.
"I don't even vote in this country. Like, why is Rishi Sunak tagging me?" You know how, like, especially every US election cycle, I get,
Yeah, yeah.
messages from every candidate and all of that, and it's a mass and it was quite cool because they chose Jack as one of the ones to show off as part of the, amazing cohort of over 90 young innovators in the UK. I got to sort of be in in that, and
You got
Jack
to
got
join them for that.
yeah, I was like, "Oh, wow. Hey, Rishi," like, glad you chose to talk about
Oh,
sperm in
that's
this.
amazing. That's
That was
yeah.
pretty cool. That was really special, and similarly, being one of the especially being very commercially minded people, there were some, things that we've wanted to achieve, especially on the marketing side, and one of the amazing things that's happened so far, is being featured in a number of like, we were in Men's Health, we were
Mhm.
in GQ, having inbound journalists come reach out to us, and then these extraordinary writers sort of highlight not only the industry, but what we're trying to do, and that was
Mhm.
so both of those were really, sort of landmark moments that don't mean to brag, but really were the kind of, "Okay, we're doing something right," and getting that
Mhm.
feedback, so
I love that. I love that. I just
definitely.
have to know, was the Prime Minister open and on the level with the humor surrounding Jack Fertility? Did he get it?
I think he played the right political line for sure.
Hmm.
I bet there was probably a twinkle in the eye of the press office when they were at that for sure.
Gotcha, gotcha. That's awesome. That's really, really cool. Um, And yeah, so what's interesting is that even though you're from America, you started in the US and then you went and got your MBA from Oxford. And then that's where Jack Fertility began as an Oxford-backed venture. So I guess I mean I would assume that it's partially because of your co-founder, but why did you guys ultimately decide to build in the UK?
Yeah, great question. Because yeah, sometimes I do ask myself that. Why did I do but we have both sort of there's a bit of a cultural reason and then also a strategic
Hmm.
reason doing this. And the strategic reason is really twofold. One is the regulatory environment here.
Hmm.
So it is fertility is very highly regulated and it's a lot more regulated than it is in the US in many ways. And of course
Really?
it's Roe v. Wade, like there's such a very the Roe v. Wade overturn. Um,
Hmm.
the whole reproductive health industry has been sort of rocked, and so I think it's a very volatile time. Um,
Hmm.
and so for us, with the relative stability of the regulatory environment here, as well as the sort of higher barriers to entry, made a lot of sense for us to start here. And frankly, the lack of competition. It's a really interesting market, of course, and that sort of leads us to the marketing reason why we're here. Is I mean, even just sort of in the many colorful ways you can talk about creating a sample. There's a lot of colloquial language in the UK surrounding that versus in the US, it's probably arguably even more of a taboo. Like we don't, I mean, again, apologies to be crude on your podcast, but there isn't really a word for a person who's creating a sample versus there are so many in Britain, and there's a lot more of a cultural like openness to that.
Hmm.
And so you can kind of meet people again where they are a lot more easily with I mean, again, in the name Jack, right?
Hmm.
Um, that was really interesting to us, and of course, Nick's background in marketing in the UK. So I think
Right, right.
two of the major reasons, and then also just even again for everyone's sort of interesting cultural observation is
Hmm.
from my mindset. One, I thought it was really it's quite fun to be an American in the UK because I am quite direct. I'm quite loud and I just say what I'm thinking. And
Hmm.
it's definitely good to have Nick built in as my cultural translator. But it's I kind of shake things up, and I think especially in the
Hmm.
venture world, being an American, just so you kind of have a leg up in
Hmm.
general. The other piece that is important is the level of litigation. So even though this is not regulated, and of course we're following everything from a compliance side, like I've heard many horror stories from friends building in the US, and particularly friends who start in the UK and go to the US, just with how intense people can be around just various types of lawsuits and all of that. And just
Hmm.
frankly, from a stress management perspective, it's a far less litigious society here, and there's no incentive to do that. And so it's been really great to, especially from my background coming from both law and banking, which are both so highly regulated. And similarly with Nick, we can sort of build with compliance in mind here, but without the sort of constant threat of all of your funding going into fighting legal battles or IP disputes or all of that. And I think that that is something that I hear a lot from other American founders in the UK is this sort of mental freedom of not having that specter looming over you constantly on
Hmm.
whichever front.
Gotcha. Yeah, wow. I didn't even see like consider the cultural differences in the reception of your guys' marketing and your concept. Um, gonna throw kind of a curveball question at you because I didn't really look this up before preparing for the interview. So are you guys still solely operating in the UK? Have you expanded to any other countries at all?
So not yet, but we get
Hmm.
constant inbound from Europe.
Okay.
Even since basically since we put up our website and started talking about this online, there's a massive demand for this sort of testing in Europe, both in the
Hmm.
EU and with other sort of associated countries because of the rapidly declining birth rates. So a number of
Hmm.
our investors, they frankly just invested because they're so worried about this.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where we likely, because we're direct to consumer now, part of that is to really learn the consumer themselves, and
Mhm.
have that competitive advantage of understanding what type of products would suit what kind of personas. But longer term, once we sort of get that confirmation, the lab software that we've built and the combination of the kit will be something that is really massively easily distributable through B2B partnerships. And rather
Right.
than needing to come up with Jacques Fertility in France, or whatever, Giacomo in Italy,
I
um,
love that. I love that.
uh, yeah, we're not anticipating having to start up that because these markets know their customers so well, and whether it's
Mhm.
chemists or distributors, we've had people from Eastern Europe reach out a lot. A lot of there's so much fertility tourism in, for example, Spain and Portugal, that it only makes sense for us to be there, but in the ways that serve the market and the infrastructure well,
Mhm.
especially since Royal Mail's great, but obviously Royal Mail is the UK. So,
Gotcha,
yeah,
gotcha.
to your question, that and transparently, that's where we're most interested in
Mhm.
expanding next.
Gotcha. Well, I'll be looking forward to the day that when that arrives.
Thank you so much.
But yeah, so um, we're reaching the end of our time. So I'm hoping that these last couple questions will be able to sort of glean some takeaways and last words from our conversation as a whole. Starting off with, your experience as a leader. We touched on it a little bit earlier. As a founder, as a part of a company that's bringing social change. In another interview that I watched before, getting to meet you here, you mentioned that your joy as a leader has been to cultivate excellence in others. And so I was just curious, what or who inspires you in your leadership? And then for our fellow founders listening, or who will be listening to this recording, what advice would you give them to help them find good mentorship or examples to follow?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking, and thank you for listening to another interview with
Oh,
me.
yeah, of course.
That's so kind. But you're right. That is one of my greatest joys, and I attribute that with one of my inspirations is my parents. They're both
Mm,
professors, and are really devoted to sort of serving others, as well as particularly around youth and teaching and inspiring people. And so that having their amazing support and letting letting me go off into the world and move to the UK and become a sperm entrepreneur. I mean, that's pretty highly to their supportive nature, but also they do push me to always do my best and to stay true to our values. And that since I was really little has always been really important to me, and creating a legacy that's far past, myself and what anything that I want to achieve, and making sure the best way to sort of put things into the world is to really continue cultivating that in those who will come after. So I think that's one thing, of
mm,
course, my parents, but also very inspired by being a very young teenager when the Obama campaign was happening in 2008. And that
mhm,
was so formative to see the Obamas sort of take this amazing movement of hope and change, and seeing how powerful that is, and especially in sort of modern times, how all of those different political shifts have happened, yet at the same time everyone always wanting to pursue a good life, and it's a good life for
mhm,
their families and what that looks like. And so
mhm,
for me, I think that finding people who resonate, of course, I'm gonna be like, the Obamas do inspire, they genuinely do inspire me, but I think closer to home, there's so many amazing people. For example, I worked for the Oxford Character Project here at the university, and the leadership there is extraordinary. I got to meet so many amazing leaders across tech, law, banking, consumer goods and services, as well as academics who are really pursuing ways in our modern world to figure out what our values are and how to live that great life and leave the world better than we found
mhm,
it, as much as we can try to. And so that's my advice to founders, is really find people and find communities that support that. So for example, for me in the UK, that's been a mix of the Women of the Future organization, who are really all about kindness and leadership. So
mhm,
again, these sort of undervalued values that often are shown academically, when you look back, seeing companies that do value those things like creativity, curiosity, kindness, empathy, all of these sort of, again, things that we never want to talk about, but actually are
mhm,
the difference makers. I would find communities like that, Women of the Future, for example. Founders Pledge is another great one that is within the Founders Forum group here in the UK. It's a global organization, but people who are members pledge to give around 5% of anything they make from their startup, pledge that to charity and to optimize the impact of those funds. So I recently joined that and have been so inspired by the membership of
Hmm.
entrepreneurs who are trying to, whether their venture is necessarily strictly impact driven or not, just these folks who really are trying to make a difference in the world, and can support each other when times get tough because boy, do they get tough.
Oh yeah.
Um, but
But
having that
I bet it
support,
feels great to have that community there. Um,
100%.
mhm.
Yeah. So hopefully those are helpful resources, but those are definitely having especially celebrities who have podcasts that always leave you coming away with a good message.
Mhm.
Those really get me through, I'll say, the late nights and the long bus rides and all of those unglamorous things that are never going to make the LinkedIn until hopefully someday,
Mhm.
my God, we got through that retrospective. But yeah, and similarly, if there's a way I can support, please always feel free to reach out.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I guess there is no better way than to end this conversation, with like a word of advice or some encouragement. So from your experience, and speaking from the challenges that you faced and sort of what you're wanting to accomplish, for the other founders listening who are also working to build solutions, or bring awareness to taboo topics, what is a word of encouragement, that you would want to give to those who are also on that grind?
Yeah, I would say one, keep going. That's what all of my closest mentors, for example, Ed Brooks, who runs the character project at Oxford, just would say that to me all the time and throughout some of my toughest times. And that was actually something so simple, was just that. It's like, keep going. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think there's so much emphasis on, especially with when metrics and KPIs and all these things get in there, being so perfect all the time and having the perfect growth curve and the perfect this and the perfect that. Sometimes it is literally just keeping going,
Mhm.
especially if you believe in what you're doing and you know that it's going to make a positive difference. Like, find those glimmers is the other piece. Is like, for example, for us, like for all the absolute nonsense and crude things and a lot of the bias I've contended with, like for every one of those awful times that's really felt like almost like a punch in the face. Like, I remember things like these babies that are gonna be born, these families that are being built, these people who are empowered, the I mean, even the quality of a great pun, like, some of these glimmers just keep you going and finding what those things are, and then leaning into them, like, not being afraid to be happy and celebrate, and you don't have to keep it a grind all the time. I think there's a lot of a narrative around that, and this sort of rest is rebellion kind of mindset is extraordinarily important, and having a support system, whether it be friends, family, random redditors, like whoever your people are, keeping them close and reminding each other of that. So keep going, what you're doing matters, and don't be afraid to take risks and find the people who will come and back you up.
Awesome. That's amazing. I can't wait to see, what you guys will accomplish in the future. And who knows who else you might inspire as well, to start making change in the world. But thank you so much, for joining us, Lily. It was really, truly a pleasure getting to hear from you today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Alexis, and thank you for the amazing questions. I really enjoyed it.
Of course, of course. And so that concludes this session, and we'll be signing off. Thank you.